How do Scandinavians cope with the darkness of winter? Now, first of all, as always, I want to point out that I don't think that you have to live in a specific geographical location in order to take advantage of maybe what people do there. This is meant as an inspiration, no matter where you live. And also, I talk about the Nordic countries and Scandinavian traditions because that is what I know. I grew up in Denmark. I have traveled extensively in Scandinavia. Many of my best friends live in Norway, some of them near the Arctic Circle. So I draw on my experience from what I know myself, and that's what I'm sharing here with you today. So I hope you're comfortable. Got your favorite maybe cup of tea, got 15 minutes undisturbed, and I will try and share some inspirations with you. Hopefully, it can help you cope with the darkness of winter if you are one of those people that struggle with that. Now, let me just say that just because people are born, for example, in Scandinavia, it doesn't mean that they don't struggle, with the darkness of winter, but it's finding different ways of coping with it. And there are definitely different strategies, there's different methods that you can use. And because I have traveled and lived all over the world, I have really noticed the different attitude that people bring to this. And not to say that one is right and one is wrong, but there are some takeaways that I hope that you can apply from today. And I'll share a little story at the end as well, which I thought was perfect because it ties in with this talk so beautifully. So, first of all, in Scandinavia, yes, in the further north you get towards the Arctic Circle, that is where you will have the really, really dark winter, where the sun might only be like a slither on the horizon. You can't tell whether it's sunrise or sunset, and that is all that you see of the sun. So, yes, it can be very, very dark at times. And further down, I mean, in Denmark, where I was born, yes, it goes dark, but you still have daylight for like a fair amount of hours. Um, and it weighs it up. So I think obviously if you live in the Arctic Circle, you have during the summer, you have days where the sun does not set. So it's like 24 hours of sunshine. And further down south, it just means that you've got really longer evenings and shorter nights. And I think in Scandinavia there is a bit of there is a deep understanding that it's a trade-off. At the end of the day, it's a trade-off. You have the long summer nights, the warm summer nights, all the lovely bright evenings where you can be outside and enjoy life outside in nature under the open sky. You have that, but it also means that then in the winter, days are shorter. And that doesn't mean that every Scandinavian actually necessarily loves summer more than winter. You might be really surprised that that is not actually the case. And anyway, I don't believe in picking favorites. um, but I do know that I think in Scandinavia there is, and that's in the Nordic countries in general, because I don't want to exclude anyone that lives further afield. And as I said, this will apply to maybe if you live in Canada or Alaska as well. But I've never been there. I hope to go there one day, so I'm sure I will then notice the similarities, even though there will obviously be differences as well. But I sidetracked. I can't remember now where I was. But the whole point is that you have an appreciation that life is a circular. It's a cyclus. It goes in cycles, and it means that when you have the the warmer summers and the longer days, there's a trade-off because it balances itself out. And balance is such a key element of Nordic living. And I think an element that has sometimes become forgotten because we think we can control all the outer circumstances in our lives. Um, we can we can have air conditioned skyscrapers in the desert, and you can go skiing in, moles in the desert, but at the end of the day, nature around us dictates our lives, whether we like it or not. And I think it means that we also have to bring a certain amount of humility to the table when it comes to coping with the seasons. And I say coping, I really mean living in harmony with the seasons. And it's so funny because when I started this talk, it was all bright, and you can just tell it's getting darker and darker outside. Um, and some things are just out of our control. Like that, I thought it was really good lighting. Clearly, I need to start having my spotlight on. Okay, so that brings me to the next point, really. So yes, so remembering that we are secular beings, we are part of a whole, and that whole is the year. Now, if you live close to the equator, you're not going to have much change, but there's still got to be changes, and it's finding a way of living in harmony and and thriving in that as well. Now, having said that, out and you realize it's not actually as bad as it might necessarily look from the inside. And guess what? It really invigorates you. Yes, I got a bit wet. I had to hang my coat up. Yeah, okay. But the beauty is that if you expose yourself to kind of, the inclement weather, the coldness, and everything else, yes, you can definitely double down on the hygge when you come back in. So it just makes the whole coming inside even more enjoyable. And I think it's remembering that, like it's just kind of sometimes we just have to kind of go out, even though it might not be that nice. But in Scandinavia, if you've been following me for a while, I always remember to say this. We have the saying, there's no such thing as bad weather, just the wrong clothing. So getting outside and grabbing as much daylight as you can. Now, if you work, it can be really difficult. I think most employers now recognize that it is important that people leave their desks and get outside. And even if you live in or not live, if you work like in an industry, like a care industry, where you're not have office hours, there are still pockets of time that allow people to go outside. And literally going outside, even though it rains, you are still exposing yourself to, I shouldn't say exposing, it sounds so negative. You are really allowing yourself to soak up the daylight that is there through your skin. Now, having said that as well, daylight is not always that sufficient. So in Scandinavia, a lot of people will make sure to either eat a lot of oily fish during the winter in order to get their vitamin D, or take vitamin D supplements. And it's worth bearing in mind that that can also make a really big benefit to your well-being. So if you haven't got a diet that is necessarily uh, balanced, there's that word again, or in tune with the season and the locality where you live, then it's very important to kind of look at this. And in Scandinavia, these fatty fish will typically involve like herring, mackerel, salmon, and these are all part of the big meals as well at this time of year, for very good reason. They can still be caught fresh, they can still be served fresh, and they contain a lot of minerals and vitamins that we need. I will not start talking about all the pollutants as well, because that is obviously a big concern for many people. But it is that thing again of remembering, to be part of this cycle of the year, cycle of life, and stay true to the season. And I talked about nature, and nature is just recognizing also that we are nature. Nature is not outside us. So it's also about finding the beauty in nature when you're out there. And I think it's very easy to, especially if you're a person that really loves spring and summer, it can sometimes be really hard to find the positive, in a rainy day like today. But it is possible. And that links in with the next thing that I was going to say, which has to do with, has to do with partly mindset, but very much to do with the weather. Now, when I moved to the UK, I really noticed how much people start, they talk and they bond around the theme of weather. It's like most conversation, like, how are you? Oh, great weather, bad weather. Okay. Isn't it too hot today? And generally there tends to be a little moan or a little complaint at the end of this. And this is nothing to do with English people. I think it's just like a culture thing. And sometimes we can get swept up in it. And I sometimes get swept up in it too. I'll definitely put my hand up to that. But when we kind of allow ourselves to put a negative label on it because that is what everyone else is doing, then obviously that is also going to be our experience of it. And the weather is something we cannot change. It's a component, it's outside ourselves. And I think a lot of people wish they could control the weather. I think it's so good for us that we can't, because it reminds us that we are not really in control. We like to think we're in control of everything that happens in our life and around ourselves, and we're not really. Um, but that is okay too. And it's coming to terms with that, really. So the weather is the weather. It's not good and it's not bad. The weather is. It's how we perceive the weather to be. And if everyone gets swept up in like, oh, this is horrible weather, then that is going to make you feel horrible because it's already been labeled as such. Now, in Scandinavia, everyone talks about the weather as well, because you cannot go out in the blizzard. You cannot go out. You have to plan these things. You can't go for a hike. When you know that there's like a big storm coming, for example. And I grew up on a farm, so the weather was like always like one of the main things that people will talk about. My father still has like thermometers all over the house and like little rain measure things, so he can see. I don't even know what the technical word is in English, but he can see how much rain comes. And it's not because he's, or anyone else for that sake, is concerned about whether the weather is good or bad. It's observing the weather. It's observing it for what it is. And yes, some days, if your picnic gets rained off, you can really think that it's a bad thing. But genuinely, the weather is the weather, and you can't take it personally. It's not there to ruin your day. It can obviously ruin your day, again, as I said, if you're not prepared for it and you're not wearing the right kind of clothing. So this morning I took my son to school. Hi, Lorella, nice that you could make it live. And it was really funny because it was raining, okay, and it was quite rainy, and it was also quite windy. So I don't take an umbrella. I take my raincoat and I put the hood up, and so does my son, and it wasn't so wet that we get all soaked. It was all good. And everyone who came up to me at the school, their first thing was like, "Oh, how are you? Oh, horrible weather." It was like, "Oh gosh, isn't this just dreadful today?" And I was like, "Oh, you know what? I don't actually think it's that bad. If we had a heat wave now and it was be 25 degrees, that would be even more concerning, more worrying, because that would not be the right weather." And everyone was really negative, and I just said, "Oh, well, I really love the beautiful colors on the trees this time of year." And some of the women I was talking to, they looked up and they go like, "Yeah, wow, they're really beautiful. Actually, yesterday the sun was shining. I could really see it. But they're even beautiful now because they really brighten up the grey sky." Ta-da! Okay. So I haven't changed the weather. I haven't done anything. I just stopped the bad feelings around the weather, and I let it stop with me, and I didn't pass it on to anyone else. I swapped the coin over, and I made people aware that there's something good in this as well. And then I went back home, and I managed not to get splashed too much, which was nice. And there's a delivery guy, and he goes like, "Oh, dreadful weather today, isn't it?" And I said, it's November. I don't know what you expect. I'm wearing my raincoat, so I'm fine." And he laughed, and he goes like, "Yeah, I guess it's fine." So it's the little things, and I say little things. I know mindset shifts can be really, really difficult for people. I mean, that is one of the key things that I do in my work, is like I help people change the way they look at things, the way they feel about things. And for some, it can be a really big process, but it starts one step at a time, one day at a time, okay? One thought at the time, really. So it's remembering to think of it as what it is. Anyway, back to the darkness, because now I'm aware I've gone slightly off track, and now I'm talking about rain, and weather is one thing. So another thing, how do we cope with the darkness? So this is really the hygge high season. So the lights, and we already talked about the light therapy, can be an option, but obviously having lots of lights around the house anyway is going to make you hopefully feel better about it. Get yourself out under open sky, and it doesn't matter whether the sun is shining or not, and get as much natural daylight as possible. Find the beauty in nature, and the fact, the knowledge that we are living in this, I can't say that word, in a cycle with nature and the seasons, and that goes in within us as well, because we are part of nature. And if you need to, then look at your diet and make sure that you get the right vitamins. If especially like fatty fish, vitamin D, very important for this time of year. And one thing I haven't touched upon is, again, exercise. So outdoor exercise is really important. And again, for some people, it's not practical and it might not be safe after dark. But in Scandinavia, we like to go outside and again have as much fresh air. And if you live near the Arctic Circle, that means that some of your exercise outside is going to be in the dark. But that also makes a huge difference to our physical and mental well-being as well. Now, obviously, if one lives in Norway or Sweden, as soon as the snow comes, everyone is out and enjoying the snow. If you grew up in Denmark, where I live, then snow is still a reality, but to be quite fair, most of the time it's just going to be grey and rainy. And that is fine too, because then you just have to make the most of that. And I like a good walk in the rain that might end up somewhere at a nice cafe or a pub with a lovely meal, and then you can face it again going back home. And little things that get you outside, use your body, get the oxygen, and be under the open sky as is very, very important. Now, like I said, there's lots of other things as well that you could do, but I think these are the key takeaways in addition to the hygge that you can do. Because remember, the hygge is conditional. The hygge grows inside as it goes darker and more welcoming outside, because we want to kind of create this sanctuary for ourselves. And we really take the sanctuary inside. But you also need to go out and you need to expose yourself when it's safe to, and in whatever way you can. Now, if you're the kind of person who struggles to be able to leave the house, I recommend simple things like opening the windows, for example, drawing the curtains fully aside, making sure you're looking out of your window as much as you can in the daytime hours. And what I ended up doing with my son yesterday, we had some practical things to do outside, so we were outside after dark, and he was a bit like, "Oh, don't like, it's scary in the dark." He's only 7, And I'm a bit like, I almost think it's more scary if you have a whole day when you don't actually leave the house, or where you go from one um, enclosed space like a car into another without having that fresh air in your lungs and that connection to nature. When we feel that connection to nature, then we can also take even more joy and gratitude in the fact, which again are key components to our mental well-being, of everything that we have, and also the season that we are currently a part of. So let me just check. Yes, I think I've got everything on my list. It's so long, it goes below the computer. Um, so those are some of the key things that Scandinavians do to cope with the dark of winter, and just with the season, the darker, colder winter seasons in general. And I hope you found some of these helpful. I haven't mentioned all the other bits, like, the joy of woolly jumpers and the hot tea, and all the things that, again, the outer conditions invite you and enable you to enjoy more because of the fact that they're there. But there's so much more to this. And once we can start, even if we can just find like one little thing, hopefully that can then start shifting our mind, which is probably the most important in this, because how we think affects our physical and mental well-being. So if we can start looking for the positive or the neutral, it doesn't even need to be positive, but neutral, like the weather, then we can also start enjoying the fact that, yeah, maybe it goes dark at 4 o'clock, and then we do other things because of it, because the situation invites us to live our lives in a different way than we normally would. If you have any questions to this, please let me know. And I'm just checking, can't see any. So if you think of any, you can obviously add them on in the comments below. I will do my best to try and answer them. And otherwise, I will just say thank you very much for joining me today. I haven't had a single sip of my tea, so I'm going to have that now. My green matcha and turmeric tea. There's another little thing, something nice and spicy to keep you healthy and boost your immune system. And I hope you can enjoy the rest of your week, no matter what the weather or the climate where you are. Okay, thanks for joining me. Take care. Bye bye.